Why did the silence feel heavier than the roar of the engines? She leaned her head against the steel wall of the transport, eyes half shut, listening. The vibration of the hull seeped into her skin, steady, relentless. Around her, the squad spoke little. Straps creaked, rifles clicked, breath moved in short bursts. It should have been routine by now. For most of them it was, but not for her, not tonight. She didn't belong here, not in their eyes. They never said it outright, but the glances were enough. Glances that said, why her? Glances that carried the weight of unspoken doubt. She carried those stares since day one. And she'd learned to wear them like armor. She didn't ask for trust. She didn't beg for acceptance. She just showed up, did the work, and kept the silence. That silence, it unnerved them. They thought it meant she was cold, detached. But inside her chest there was no cold. Inside her chest something burned. A vow, a memory, a name. The engines dropped pitch as the transport descended, rattling harder. The red light above the ramp bathed them all in blood. The sergeant, broad shoulders hunched forward, adjusted his comms piece and chewed gum too fast, as if speed could erase nerves. His eyes swept the squad, pausing just a half-second too long on her. He gave no words, no nod, just moved on. Across from her, the youngest of them clutched his rifle close, his knuckles pale. He looked her way, his lips parting like he wanted to speak, then hesitated. Finally, he whispered through the roar. "You ready?" She let the words hang in the air. No answer, just a measured breath, a flick of her eyes, then a small nod. The kind that didn't comfort anyone but didn't invite more questions either. He nodded back too quickly, as if needing the reassurance more than giving it. His youth made her ache in ways she didn't want to name, because she had once seen that same wide-eyed eagerness, that same desperate need to be brave, and she had seen how fast it could be stolen away. The ramp screeched open. The city below lay in ruins. Smoke clawed upward into the night sky, glowing orange in places where fire still fed. Sirens wailed in the distance, then died into eerie silence. The wind rushed in, biting, metallic, carrying with it the smell of ash. Boots hit the ground. Orders came sharp and short: spread, secure, advance. She moved in rhythm, every step measured, every glance calculated. The grit of shattered glass and crumbled stone scraped under her soles. Her rifle hugged her shoulder, sight cutting across alleys, windows, rooftops. Her heartbeat wasn't racing, though. No panic, no hesitation, just steady. The steadiness of someone who had long ago stopped counting the risks. Yet each step in this sector felt like a knife pressing deeper into her ribs. Because this wasn't just any city block, this was the place. Not marked on their maps, not listed in the briefing, not even known to the others, but she knew. She could still see it as it had been, not as it was now. She could see the building that wasn't there anymore, hear the laughter that had once filled its rooms. A different life, erased in fire. She told herself she was here for the mission. But her heart whispered a different truth. She was here for the vow she had never spoken. The sergeant's voice cut through. "Building 1 clear, building 2 clear, move." They swept forward. Dust filled her lungs, caught in her throat. Every doorway looked the same, every shadow heavier than the last. The youngest stumbled once, tripping over rubble. He cursed, laughed at himself, cheeks flushed with embarrassment. She reached out, steady hand pulling him back to his feet. His skin trembled under her grip. "Feels wrong," he muttered, his voice cracked, too quiet. She didn't answer. She didn't need to, because he was right. The squad reached the outpost. Its walls were scarred black, steel warped by blasts. Doors hung crooked, one barely clinging to its hinges. Inside, the air was stale. The smell of burned wiring mixed with mold, thick and bitter. Their boots echoed in the hollow space. Terminals blinked weakly, alive but fragile. The sergeant and comms tech moved fast, plugging drives, pulling files, copying what command had sent them to retrieve. Their voices were brisk, their hands steady. The medic checked corners, lips moving in a prayer only he could hear. The others posted by broken windows, scanning streets that looked too still. She took the farthest window, rifle resting on the frame, eyes sweeping across darkness. A thin breeze slipped through, brushing her cheek, carrying with it ash and faint voices. She froze. Not voices of the squad, not command. A different sound, faint, distorted by static. Her comms hissed, and then she heard it. Her chest tightened. A voice. It couldn't be. It was impossible. She forced her breathing silent, straining to listen. It was faint, broken, words crumbling in static, but she knew it. She knew it in her bones. That voice belonged to someone gone, someone she had buried in her heart years ago. She closed her eyes just for a second. The memory came unbidden, smoke thick as night, heat scorching, a hand slipping from hers, the scream of her own name echoing as she was pulled away. She had told herself they hadn't survived. She had sworn she had seen it. And yet here now, that same voice whispered across her headset like a ghost that refused to stay dead. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She wanted to rip off her earpiece, to demand answers, to break the silence. But the sergeant's voice crashed over it, commanding, grounding. "We got it, 5 minutes, stay sharp." She blinked hard. Her hands tightened around her rifle. Stay sharp. Easy words. But how did you stay sharp when the past reached out its hand and dragged you backward? She turned her head slightly, eyes flicking over her squad. The sergeant still chewing gum as if the taste kept fear away. The medic still murmuring prayers. The youngest shifting his stance, jaw clenched in forced bravery. She saw them all, human, fragile, afraid. And she realized something brutal. If she followed the mission, she would walk away from that voice. If she followed the voice, she might doom them all. The choice pressed into her chest, heavier with each heartbeat. Duty against vow, mission against memory, survival against truth. The night outside stirred. A low rumble, not thunder. Engines, enemy vehicles closing in. The squad stiffened, eyes narrowing, rifles rising. The medic stopped praying. The youngest swallowed hard. She checked her rifle, steady hands moving with mechanical precision. But inside, she was not steady. Inside, her heart roared louder than the war building around them. And in that roar, she felt the vow alive again. She didn't whisper prayers, she roared them, through fire, through iron, through silence and chaos alike. Her jaw set, her finger curled against the trigger, gentle but ready. Her eyes locked on the horizon where shadows shifted and headlights flared. The enemy was coming. The squad would be tested, and so would she. But not for the same reasons. They thought they knew what this mission was. They thought they knew why she was here. They didn't, they couldn't. Because she hadn't told them the truth. Not yet. The headlights cut through the smoke first. Faint, pale beams slicing across rubble and bent steel. Engines rumbled closer, heavy, grinding, the kind of sound that sank into bone. She adjusted her scope, eyes narrowing, her breath held just enough to steady the glass. Shapes emerged, armored vehicles, more than one. Their silhouettes stretched long against the flames in the distance, and in that moment she knew what the sergeant would say before he even opened his mouth. "Positions, stay tight." His voice was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that lived just above fear. He tapped his comms, chewing faster, jaw muscles twitching. The youngest shifted at the far window, his breathing too loud, too uneven. She glanced at him once, quick, sharp. He noticed, swallowed hard, forced himself to breathe quieter. That small correction might have saved him already. The medic tightened the strap of his helmet, lips moving in that same prayer. Not whispered this time. Louder. Like he was daring the silence outside to listen. She almost envied him, that kind of faith. But faith had left her long ago, buried in the ashes of this very place. And then the voice came again. Through her comms, faint, almost drowned out by static. "Anyone." Her blood froze, her stomach knotted. She tilted her head ever so slightly, pressing the earpiece tighter. Words bled through in fragments. "Sector 3, still here, can't hold." It was the same voice, fragile, battered, but unmistakably theirs. Her vow clawed its way up from her chest like fire tearing through wood. She wanted to answer. She wanted to rip off protocol and whisper back, "I hear you, I'm coming." But she couldn't. If she spoke now, the squad would hear. The sergeant would demand explanation. The medic would look at her with questions she wasn't ready to answer. And the youngest, wide-eyed and trembling, would lose the fragile thread of trust he had in her silence. So she stayed still, rifle steady, heart chaos. The vehicles halted outside, engines idling low. Boots hit the ground one after another. She counted them in her head, too many, more than they could hold off for long. The sergeant whispered through comms, "2 squads, maybe 3, stay sharp. We hold this until the bird comes back." She lined up her scope on the first shadow moving between beams of light. Trigger slack taken up, breath steady, decision waiting. But something in her chest screamed louder than the mission. The voice had said Sector 3. That was close. Close enough that, if it were true, they were not alone in this ruin. Close enough that everything she thought finished years ago might still be burning, breathing, waiting. Her finger hovered, her eyes blurred. For a second the shadow in her scope wasn't an enemy soldier. It was a memory. That night, the hand slipping from hers, the scream that never left her ears. "On my mark," the sergeant said. She blinked hard, the shadow snapped back into focus. A rifle, an enemy, not a ghost, not a memory, real here now. The sergeant's voice was low, final. "Mark." Gunfire cracked through the silence. Windows burst with recoil, sparks lit the street. She fired without hesitation, scope steady, muzzle flash lighting her face in bursts. The enemy fell, but more surged forward. They shouted in a language she didn't know, voices hard, confident. Bullets struck walls, glass shattered, dust filled the air. The youngest fired too fast, panicked. His shots sprayed wide, ricocheting uselessly off stone. She darted her eyes to him. His hands trembled, his jaw clenched too tight. She hissed through her teeth, just loud enough for him. "Breathe." One word, sharp, commanding. He snapped his head toward her, eyes wide, then forced air through his lungs, slowed his trigger pull. His shots found their mark. A small victory, but one that steadied him. The medic shouted from behind cover, "They're flanking." She pivoted, sight snapping to movement along the right wall. Shadows slipped closer, too close. She shifted, squeezed, watched them drop. Her shoulder ached from recoil, but she didn't flinch. Not once. The sergeant barked, 2 minutes, hold them. But 2 minutes in a storm like this felt like an eternity. Bullets tore chunks from concrete, sparks rained down from broken wiring above. The room smelled of cordite and dust, thick enough to choke. Her ears rang with every shot, every scream, every impact. And through it all, the voice in her comms whispered again. "Not much longer, please." Her hands almost faltered, almost. She pressed her lips together, teeth cutting into the inside of her cheek. She wanted to shout into the comms, to demand, "Where are you? Who's with you? How are you alive?" But instead she fired again, eyes burning, throat tight. The youngest cried out, a sharp gasp. His shoulder slammed into the wall, not hit, just grazed. He clutched at it, eyes wide in panic. She slid across rubble, grabbed his vest, yanked him back behind cover. Their faces were inches apart, dust coating both. "You're fine," she hissed. "Stay in it." His lip trembled, breath ragged, but he nodded. His eyes searched hers like he wanted to believe she was unbreakable. She gave him nothing but steel. Outside, headlights shifted, engines revved. More boots, more shadows. This wasn't a probe, this was a push. The sergeant's gum was gone now, jaw tight, voice clipped. 30 seconds. She scanned, scope swinging, counting bodies, counting breaths. The medic shouted again, "We can't hold much longer." And then the impossible happened. The voice in her comms cut through stronger, louder, as if distance itself had bent. One word this time. A name, her name. Her heart stopped. The world seemed to freeze. The fire outside, the bullets tearing stone, the shouts of enemies closing in, all of it faded. For that heartbeat, she was no longer here. She was back there. smoke choking her lungs, rubble collapsing around her, a hand slipping from hers. That name shouted once before silence swallowed it forever. Except it hadn't been forever. It was here, now alive. Her throat ached, her chest burned. And she knew then, with terrifying clarity, that this mission was no longer the mission. She had a choice to make, not later, not tomorrow, now. Stay with the squad, finish the task, survive. Or follow the voice, break from them, risk everything. Her finger trembled against the trigger, her jaw locked. The sergeant shouted, "Time, fall back." Engines roared louder outside, extraction inbound, salvation inches away. The squad moved fast, retreating from windows, regrouping near the broken doorway. The youngest limped but kept up. The medic dragged spare ammo, face pale. The sergeant barked orders like a drumbeat. But she stood still, rifle raised, heart torn, ears full of a voice that should have been dead. And in the split second before she moved, before she chose, she realized something brutal. If she told them the truth now, they would stop her. If she followed silently, she might never return. And either way, someone she cared about was going to be left behind. Why did her boots feel heavier than her rifle? She forced herself forward, one step at a time, following the squad as they pulled back through the outpost's shattered doorway. Bullets carved the walls behind them, sparks scattering. The sergeant shouted over the noise, "Move, now!" His voice cut like steel, but his eyes flicked back once fast to make sure they all were still there. They weren't, not completely. She lingered half a step behind, torn between two directions. Extraction was coming, salvation, survival, mission complete. That's what command demanded. That's what the squad expected. But her ears buzzed with static, with the ghostly sound of a voice that refused to die. Her name, whispered through broken comms, a call only she could hear. The medic stumbled on debris, the youngest caught his arm, yanking him forward. The sergeant shoved them both toward cover, barking orders, chewing air now instead of gum. She moved with them, rifle raised, eyes scanning the smoke-filled street, yet part of her vision blurred. She wasn't looking at the enemy anymore. She was looking past them, to where that voice might be, to where she had sworn once she'd never return. Gunfire cracked. A round skipped too close, sparking off the wall near her face. She flinched late, slower than she should have. The sergeant noticed. He cursed under his breath, eyes narrowing, not at the enemy, at her. "Stay sharp," he snapped. She nodded, quick, too quick. But her chest was still heaving with the weight of something she couldn't name. They reached the cover of a collapsed bus, metal bent into jagged teeth. The youngest pressed his back against it, panting, eyes wild. "We're not gonna make it," he muttered, too loud. The medic grabbed his shoulder, forcing his eyes steady. "Breathe, you're fine, look at me, you're fine." The sergeant ignored them both, tapping his comms, listening for the extraction bird. Static, more static. Then finally a burst of voice, 2 minutes, hold your ground. 2 minutes, again, always 2 minutes, always an eternity. She crouched low, sighting down the street, watching enemy shapes reposition. They weren't rushing now. They were circling, smarter than command had promised, smarter than the briefing had prepared them for. Her hand steadied the rifle, but her ears weren't steady. The voice slipped in again, clearer this time, almost as if carried by the same static the extraction team used. "Sector 3, still here, you promised." Her gut twisted. She had promised, years ago, in a room not far from here. A vow whispered through smoke and fire as the world collapsed around them. She had promised she'd come back. She had failed then. And yet here was the voice, still alive, still waiting, still holding her to that vow. The sergeant caught her staring too long into the haze, eyes unfocused. He leaned closer, teeth clenched. "What the hell is wrong with you?" She didn't answer, couldn't. If she spoke, the truth might slip out, and once it was out, everything would unravel. He glared, chewing air, then turned away, snapping at the others. "Eyes up, cover the street." The youngest raised his rifle again, hand steadier now. The medic adjusted his vest, wiped blood from his cheek, not his own, but it made him look older than he was. They were trying, fighting, believing in the mission. And she was breaking. The engines roared above. The bird appeared through smoke, blades whipping ash into storms. Its spotlight cut the street open, bright and harsh. Relief surged through the squad. The youngest shouted, "We're good, we're good." But she was. Because the bird wasn't circling towards Sector 3. It was here for them, just them. The sergeant signaled, "Quick, sharp, move." They broke cover, sprinting for the rope line. Bullets chased them, snapping air, striking sparks from pavement. The medic stumbled but kept his feet. The youngest nearly tripped again, but she shoved him forward, steadying him with a grip that bruised. One by one, they grabbed the ropes, hoisting up. The sergeant went first, hauling with practiced strength. The medic next, teeth gritted. The youngest scrambled, clumsy but determined. She stood at the base, rifle raised, covering their ascent. Her pulse thundered, her comms buzzed, and again the voice. "You said you'd come back." Her throat closed. She should climb now, grab the rope, leave this sector behind forever. Mission complete, survival secured, she should. But she didn't move. She fired into the smoke, covering shadows, but her eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. Her body stood here, but her heart was already down that street, toward Sector 3, toward the voice that refused to die. The sergeant shouted from above, voice ragged, furious, "Climb now." She didn't. Instead, she whispered to herself, low, raw, the kind of whisper no one else could hear over blades and bullets. "I promised." The youngest looked down, panic flashing in his eyes. "Come on, don't stay." His voice cracked, terrified of losing her. She gave him the same nod she had given in the transport. Small, controlled, final. Then she turned, away from the rope, away from extraction. Into the fire. Bullets snapped past her as she sprinted across rubble, slipping between collapsed walls, vanishing into smoke. The sergeant's curses tore through her comms, but she switched channels, silencing him. All she let through was static, and beneath it that voice, pulling her forward. Her lungs burned. Her boots slammed against broken pavement. Her body screamed with exhaustion, but her mind was alive in a way it hadn't been in years. Every corner, every alley, every ruin, all of it familiar. This was the place she had sworn she'd never return to, and yet she was here, by choice. Because this wasn't about survival anymore. This was about redemption. She slid to a halt against a broken wall, chest heaving, eyes scanning. Her comms hissed again. Louder now, closer. "Please, Sector 3, I'm still here." Her hand pressed against the wall, trembling. Not fear, not hesitation, something deeper, something like hope. A hope she hated herself for feeling, because hope had always been the cruelest liar. She forced her rifle up, scanning, streets empty, shadows shifting, every sound magnified. Her pulse pounded in her ears like war drums. And then faint, a light, weak flickering through a basement window 2 buildings ahead. Her breath caught. Was it real, or just the city playing tricks? She didn't know. But she was going to find out. Why did the quiet feel louder than the battlefield? Inside the dim hold of the transport, every soldier sat wrapped in their own silence. Boots pressed to the deck, weapons resting against armored knees, helmets hanging loose. The hum of the engines was steady, but it only seemed to emphasize the hush. She sat among them, her posture straight, her hands folded carefully, her eyes on the dim strip of light running along the ceiling. No one spoke. She wondered if anyone else noticed the way the silence pressed against their ribs. Or was it just her heart beating too hard, too fast, too loud? The mission wasn't far now. She had been briefed twice, 3 times, but she kept replaying the words. Every route, every signal, every fallback point. Yet beneath that training detail was something deeper, a thread that tugged at her. The mission wasn't just duty. It wasn't just service. It was personal. She had carried her father's dog tags since she was 19. They hung beneath her shirt now, cool against her collarbone, a small weight that felt heavier tonight. Her father had died in a different war, a different place, but his silence had lived with her ever since. He had always told her, when fear comes, don't pray for safety, pray for strength, then roar it out. She used to laugh when he said it. But now, in this suffocating quiet, she found herself gripping the tags and hearing his voice again. The corporal across from her coughed lightly, a nervous tick. He looked too young, or maybe they all looked young before the dust and the years carved into their faces. He caught her eye for a second as if searching for reassurance. She gave him the smallest nod, that was all. His shoulders eased. Still, she could feel the others stealing glances at her when they thought she wasn't looking. Not mistrust, something else. Expectation, maybe, as if they sensed she carried something heavier than her rifle. The intercom cracked, a voice sharp, precise, 5 minutes. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Helmets snapped on, rifles checked, clips tapped. Every soldier performed the rituals they had done 100 times before, but tonight their movements felt slower, measured, almost reverent, as if each knew they were walking into something different, something not easily returned from. She checked her own gear last, not out of slowness, out of habit, her focus sharpened, gloves pulled tight, rifle slung into place, her breath measured, steady. Her chest rose and fell like the rhythm of a drum beat. But inside there was that roaring prayer, the one her father taught her, rising through fire and iron. The doors hissed, the night rushed in. A cold wind swept through the hold as the ramp lowered. Outside there was no city skyline, no shining lights, just darkness layered over jagged ground, mountains in the distance like silent watchmen, the faintest shimmer of moonlight over stone. The squad filed out, boots crunching gravel, weapons raised. Shadows stretched long. The air tasted of dust and tension. She stepped out last, scanning the horizon. Something about the landscape felt wrong, too still. Not even the insects hummed. Formation tight, the lieutenant whispered, raising a fist. The soldiers closed ranks. The path ahead was narrow, winding between rocky outcrops. They moved quietly, but every footfall echoed louder than it should have. Each soldier's breath misted in the cold night air, vanishing almost instantly. Halfway through the pass, the first sound came, a sharp crack in the distance. Not gunfire, not yet. Something metallic shifting against stone. Everyone froze. Her eyes tracked the darkness. Something was there, watching. She could feel it. The hairs at the back of her neck lifted. The lieutenant signaled them forward, slowly, carefully, but the silence grew heavier with each step. She kept her rifle up, scanning left, right, above. Her breath slowed, her body tightened. Her instincts whispered, not yet, but soon. Then it came. A burst of movement from the ridge, shadows breaking apart, figures pouring down, weapons glinting. The night shattered into chaos. Gunfire cracked, sparks flashed, the air filled with smoke and dust. She dropped low, sighted squeezed. One target down, another. Her focus narrowed. Her world became the space between breaths, the triggers break, the recoil kicking against her shoulder. The young corporal beside her froze for half a second, staring wide-eyed at the ridge. She grabbed his vest, yanked him down just as a burst of fire tore through where he'd been standing. He looked at her, shaken, and she just shoved him forward. Move. Her voice was sharp, not unkind, but commanding. The fight dragged on, bursts of fire echoing, shouts mixing with stone shrapnel. But through it all she felt something strange, calm. Not the calm of detachment, the calm of choice. The calm her father had spoken about. Fear was there, yes, but it wasn't in control. She was. Minutes passed like hours. Then suddenly the firing slowed. The ridge emptied. The shadows retreated into deeper darkness. The silence returned, but now it was ragged, broken by the sound of heavy breathing, boots scuffing stone, the faint groans of the wounded. The squad regrouped. Some limped, some leaned on others. Faces streaked with dust, helmets dented, eyes wide, but they were alive, most of them. The lieutenant gave quick orders, steady but low, his hand trembling as he pointed out the fallback route. She noticed it, the tremor. He was holding on by threads. And she realized something then. This silence, this weight pressing over all of them, it wasn't going away. Not tonight, maybe not ever, but it was hers to carry too. As they moved again, she lingered at the rear, covering the shadows behind them. Her breath fogged the air. The dog tags pressed cold against her chest, and in the quiet of her mind she roared that prayer again. Not whispered, not begged, roared. Because death wasn't waiting ahead. It was already here, stalking them in silence. But so was she. Why did every shadow feel like it carried eyes? The squad moved deeper into the terrain, boots grinding against loose rock, breaths heavy in the cold night air. The ridge they had fought through loomed behind them now, a black silhouette against a fractured moon. Each soldier carried new weight, wounds, fatigue, silence. No one spoke, not because they had nothing to say, but because words felt fragile here. She walked near the middle of the column, rifle angled, eyes scanning. Her mind worked in loops. Was the ambush planned, or were they just unlucky enough to pass under waiting eyes? The lieutenant's voice replayed in her head, steady, commanding, but she remembered the tremor in his hand. Leaders weren't supposed to shake, but they all did in different ways. She thought of the young corporal she'd yanked down. His helmet was chipped, dust clinging to his face. He glanced at her more often now, not with fear, not even gratitude, something else, like a question he couldn't put into words. Her chest tightened. She remembered being that young once, sitting in her first transport, gripping her rifle too tightly, waiting for someone, anyone, to prove the silence wasn't permanent. That someone had been her father, and now, whether she wanted it or not, she was that figure for him. The lieutenant raised a hand, fist closed, halt. Everyone froze. The mountain pass had opened into a wide basin. Jagged rocks jutted upward like broken teeth. The air carried a strange echo, as though the space itself whispered, too open, too exposed. She crouched, scanning the ridges. Nothing, no movement, no glint, but her instincts itched, raw and unsettled. The lieutenant's eyes met hers across the dim light. He didn't speak, but his look asked, "Do we move?" She gave a slow, small nod, not because she was sure, but because hesitation could kill them faster than any bullet. The column moved again, step by step. Each crunch of gravel sounded too loud. Halfway across the basin she caught it, a sound, faint like metal scraping against stone, not close, not far, just enough to set her heart racing. She didn't signal, didn't call it out. Some sounds couldn't be trusted until they revealed themselves. The squad reached the far edge of the basin. The moment the first soldier stepped into the narrow exit path, a flare screamed overhead. White light burst across the rocks, searing the basin in harsh glow. Shadows dissolved. Every soldier flinched. And then silence. No gunfire, no movement, just the flare hissing as it drifted down, casting everything in unnatural light. Her breath caught. This wasn't an ambush, not yet. This was theater. Someone wanted them seen. Someone wanted them waiting. The lieutenant barked, cover arcs, eyes sharp. His voice strained, forced louder than necessary, trying to keep the squad steady. She pressed against a rock, rifle up, scanning the ridges. The flare burned lower, slower, dragging out the tension. Still nothing. And then a voice. It carried from the rocks, distorted by distance, by echo. Not their language, but the tone was unmistakable, mocking, drawn out, taunting. The young corporal stiffened. Another soldier muttered under his breath. The lieutenant gritted his jaw. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat. The voice gnawed at her, not for what it said, but for what it meant. They were being toyed with, and that was worse than bullets. The flare fizzled out. Darkness swept back in. Seconds passed. Nothing, no movement, no fire, just the night. Finally, the lieutenant signaled. Quick, move. They had no choice but to push through. The squad squeezed into the narrow exit path, shadows pressing against them like walls. She brought up the rear, eyes burning from the sudden dark, ears straining for the slightest sound. For 20 minutes nothing came, just their boots, their breaths, the faint clink of gear. But the silence felt wrong. Too deliberate. At last the path opened into another valley, smaller, tighter, the kind where echoes trapped themselves. They paused, regrouped. The lieutenant checked his map, his hand steadier now, his voice low. "We're close." Close, the word landed heavy, because close could mean safe, or it could mean the point of no return. As they huddled, one soldier, Martinez, she thought, slid down against a rock, clutching his side. She noticed the blood dark against his uniform. He hadn't said a word since the ridge fight. He'd been walking on sheer will. She crouched beside him, unfastening her pack. "Let me see." He shook his head weakly. "It's fine." Her eyes hardened. "It's not fine." She pressed gauze against the wound. He hissed, clenched his jaw, but didn't push her away. His hands trembled as he finally whispered, "Got a kid. Little girl. She thinks I'm still fixing trucks." He let out a strained laugh that caught in his throat. "Didn't want her to know." Her chest tightened again, but she kept her hand steady. "Then make sure she sees you again. Hold on." He nodded, eyes glassy, not from pain, from everything he carried. When she finished, she leaned back, exhaling slowly. Her hands were streaked with blood, her gloves sticky. She wiped them against her pants, but the mark remained. Some stains never faded. The squad rose again. They had to move. The valley stretched before them, darker than the last. No moonlight reached this far. Their night vision flickered in shades of green, shapes twisting, uncertain. Halfway through, the sound came back. Not metal, not echo, whispers. They froze as one. Her heart pounded, but her breath stayed slow. The whispers weren't close. They weren't clear, but they weren't imagination. They were real. The lieutenant motioned them down. They crouched, rifles sweeping. Minutes dragged. The whispers ebbed and flowed, always out of reach, never close enough to target. She closed her eyes, pressing her head lightly against the rock at her back. Her father's voice returned again. "Pray for strength. Roar it out." Her lips parted, but no words came. Not prayers, not commands, just breath, controlled, ready. Then, like smoke scattering, the whispers vanished. The squad exchanged looks in the dark, questions they couldn't ask, answers they didn't want. The lieutenant signaled again, "Move." Step by step they pushed through. And all the while, she carried the dog tags against her chest, the young corporal's watchful eyes at her side, Martinez's unspoken hope, and the silence that grew heavier with each passing minute. Because somewhere in that silence, death waited. But she wasn't whispering to it. She was daring it. How long could silence stretch before it broke? The valley seemed endless. Step after step, their boots sank into loose gravel, sliding with soft scrapes that echoed louder than gunfire. No one spoke. No one dared. The whispers had stopped, but they lingered in the air like smoke, like ghosts clinging to the edges of thought. She walked with her rifle raised, her eyes darting between shadows. Each rock looked like a figure waiting. Each hollow felt like a trap. Her heart didn't race anymore. It beat steady, slow, like a drum calling her forward. Fear wasn't gone. It was simply leashed. The corporal stayed close to her side now, his movements sharper, his breath shorter. He kept sneaking glances at her, and she finally whispered, barely audible, "Eyes ahead." He nodded quickly, but the truth was she understood him. She had once done the same, looking to someone else for proof that survival was still possible. Tonight, unwillingly, she had become that proof. Up front, the lieutenant signaled a halt. He crouched low, scanning the terrain ahead. Another narrow choke point loomed, darker than the last, the kind of terrain that erased choices. She could see it in his posture. He hated it. But there was no other route. The squad bunched up, tension thickening. One soldier muttered under his breath just one word, "Trap." The lieutenant's jaw clenched, but he didn't deny it. Instead, he raised his hand, signaling pairs. two by two, slow, controlled, rifles high. She exhaled. They were running out of luck, and every soldier knew it. When her turn came, she moved with the corporal. Their boots crunched in unison, breaths synchronized, rifles sweeping. The walls of rock loomed high, closing them in. The sky vanished above, only slivers of stars peeking through. Halfway through, her ears caught it again, a scrape, but not metal this time, stone, sliding. She froze. Wait, her whisper was sharp, cutting. The corporal stopped instantly. Above, a rock shifted, too controlled to be natural. Her finger tightened on the trigger. Contact high. Gunfire exploded before the words even finished. Muzzle flashes lit the ridge, sparks raining down. The squad dove for cover, stone chipping under the barrage. The narrow pass became a funnel of chaos. She pressed against the wall, rifle up, returning fire. The corporal mirrored her, but his hands shook, rounds spraying wide. She reached over, steadying his grip for half a breath. Focus, one shot at a time. He swallowed hard, nodded, and steadied. His next round struck true, and she saw the shift in his posture. Not confidence, resolve. The firefight dragged, deafening in the confined pass. Sparks showered, dust clouded. Every heartbeat was another pull of the trigger, another scream of ricochet. And then it stopped. Not gradually, abruptly. The ridge fell silent, smoke drifted upward, echoes faded into the dark. Her chest heaved, sweat chilling her skin under the armor. The corporal's face was pale, but his eyes were sharper now, alive. The lieutenant ordered, "Move, fast," before they regroup. His voice cracked but held. The squad surged forward, pushing out of the choke point, spilling into open ground again. They didn't stop until they reached a cluster of boulders, crouching low, catching breath. Martinez collapsed against a rock, his bandage already soaked through. His breaths rattled, shallow, uneven. She moved toward him, pulling open her pack again. But he grabbed her wrist, weakly shaking his head. "Save it." Her eyes hardened. "Don't be stubborn." His lips curved faintly, barely a smile. "You sound like my wife." The words cut deeper than the wound. She forced her hands steady, replacing the dressing, pressing hard to slow the bleeding. He winced but didn't fight her this time. When she finished, she leaned back, blood staining her gloves again. The smell clung, metallic, bitter. She hated how familiar it was. The corporal spoke then, quietly. "Why do they keep stopping? First the flare, then the whispers, now this." No one answered, because the truth was worse than any theory. She met his eyes, voice low. "Because they don't want us dead yet. They want us broken first." The words lingered like frost in the night air. The lieutenant gave the signal to move again. Their destination was close now, she could feel it, but so was the edge. As they advanced, she found herself slipping into memory. Not because she wanted to, but because exhaustion blurred the lines between present and past. She remembered her father's last day. The way he had stood in the doorway, uniform crisp, boots polished, smile steady. She was 17, too young to understand, too proud to beg him not to go. He had handed her the dog tags, pressing them into her palm. "When fear comes, don't whisper, roar." She hadn't understood then. Not until the knock on the door months later. Not until the folded flag. Not until the silence that followed her into every corner of life. Now, years later, in this valley of shadows, she finally understood. It wasn't about courage. It was about defiance. A refusal to be smaller than the silence pressing in. The squad climbed the last incline. Ahead, faint lights glimmered, distant but real. Their destination. Relief flickered across faces, shoulders eased, even the lieutenant's stance straightened. But her gut twisted. Lights didn't mean safety, they meant someone was waiting. As they crested the ridge, she lifted her rifle, scanning. The valley below was dotted with faint structures, abandoned, broken, leaning like forgotten bones. Their target was among them. The lieutenant raised his hand. "Final push, stay sharp." Every soldier nodded. They began their descent. The wind picked up, whistling through the rocks. Dust stung their eyes. The silence grew heavier again. And in her chest, beneath the weight of armor, beneath the sting of fatigue, she felt the dog tags press hard against her skin. She whispered, not soft but fierce, a growl under her breath, "I'm still here." Not to herself, not to her squad, to the silence itself. Why did every step feel like betrayal? The valley stretched before them, ragged and empty, as though the world itself had been hollowed out. Their boots crunched across loose gravel, each echo magnified in the cold night. She led the squad forward with steady breaths, rifle raised, scanning for movement that might not even exist. The corporal stayed close to her side, eyes darting, fingers tightening around the trigger. He had stopped looking to her for orders and now seemed to search for permission to survive. Martinez trailed a few paces behind, his bandaged side pressed against a boulder, silent but aware. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes flicked toward the shadows. Every soldier in the squad carried their own quiet weight tonight, fear, doubt, fatigue, but she carried something heavier. Somewhere in the distance, a faint flicker of light moved. She froze, reflexively dropping to one knee, rifle up. The squad mirrored her instantly. "Stay sharp," she whispered, voice low but commanding. The light flickered again, closer now. Not a flare, not gunfire, just a pulse, a heartbeat. Her pulse matched it instantly. She risked a glance to the lieutenant. His eyes were hard, scanning. He raised a hand, signaling to keep moving. Something tugged at her chest, unbidden, a memory she hadn't let surface in years. A room, smoke curling from the corners, screams buried beneath rubble, and a promise made to a voice she had thought lost forever. She swallowed hard, fighting the lump in her throat. "Sector 3, she whispered under her breath. The words were almost inaudible, but to her, they carried weight enough to shake the ground beneath her. The squad moved forward, tense, rifles up. Each step was measured. No one spoke. No one dared. The silence pressed down like a shroud. Then it came. A low, metallic scrape, almost beneath notice, but she heard it. Instantly, every hair on her arms rose. She dropped low, sweeping the area with her scope. Shadows shifted along the rocks just out of sight. The corporal gasped softly, clutching her arm. "They're here," he whispered. "Not an enemy, not yet, something else, something waiting." She pressed her lips together, steadying herself. She didn't answer. She couldn't, not yet. A sudden flash of movement on the far ridge. Rifles lifted, shots fired. Sparks flew. The crack of steel against rock echoed across the valley. She squeezed the trigger, taking down one target after another, each shot deliberate. Her breath matched the rhythm of the recoil. The corporal steadied his aim, mirroring her. The lieutenant called for a halt, voice sharp and urgent. They pressed against the rocks, catching their breaths, scanning. The flashes died down, silence returned, but it was heavier now, filled with expectation. Her chest burned, not from exertion, but from something deeper. Something she had tried to bury in the past, but tonight it had clawed its way to the surface. "Sector 3, she whispered again, louder this time, not to herself, not to the squad, but to the darkness. They moved again, inching forward, shadows clinging to their edges. She led, but her thoughts were elsewhere. The voice, the one she had sworn to protect, to find, was alive, somewhere close, and she was the only one who knew it. The terrain shifted, opening into a small compound of broken buildings, walls leaning at precarious angles. Dust rose from the ground as their boots struck it, disturbed after years of abandonment. She paused at the edge, scanning the structures. Something stirred within the shadows, quick, deliberate, alive. "Eyes up," she breathed, almost to herself. A figure moved in the far corner of the compound. She froze, heart hammering. Rifles raised, the squad watched, waiting. The figure stepped into the light, and for a moment her mind refused to accept what she saw. Alive. The voice. Her knees almost buckled. Her rifle felt heavy in her hands. Years of guilt, fear, and unanswered prayers pressed down on her. And yet through it all, a fierce, burning hope flared. She stepped forward, cautious but determined. Each footfall echoed like a drumbeat in the quiet compound. The figure, fragile, worn, but undeniably alive, looked up. Recognition passed through their eyes. Then, for a heartbeat, nothing, just the weight of history between them. And then a smile. It was tentative, fragile, but real. Her chest heaved. The squad murmured behind her, sensing something without knowing what. The lieutenant's hand rested near his sidearm, eyes narrowed. He didn't interfere. He didn't need to. This moment wasn't about the mission anymore. She lowered her rifle slowly, letting the weight of years slide off her shoulders. "Sector 3, she whispered again. Her voice stronger now, carrying through the compound, filling the empty spaces. The figure moved toward her, not running, not panicked, just walking, step by step. Her throat burned. She wanted to speak, to apologize, to explain, but words faltered. The first embrace was silent. No words needed. Years of separation, of fear, of survival, compressed into that single moment. The squad watched, quiet. Some shifted, unsteady. Others clenched their fists, silent respect in their eyes. She stepped back, looking at the figure in full now, alive, whole. The voice that had haunted her nightmares, the promise she had carried across battlefields and valleys, was here. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel relief. But the night wasn't over, not yet. The squad gathered around, rifles still up, scanning the compound. The lieutenant gave orders quietly, methodically, every movement precise. Survival still depended on vigilance. She stayed at the center, eyes on the figure. The whispers of the past clung to her, but for the first time they were accompanied by a pulse of hope. The corporal beside her whispered, barely audible, "You found them." She nodded, words failing. Her hands pressed against her chest, feeling the dog tags, the weight of her vow, the fire of her defiance. "Yes," she breathed, "I found them." The night carried on around them, wind whistling through the broken structures, dust swirling in dim light. But inside her chest, a storm had settled. Not because the mission was complete, not because danger was gone, but because she had kept her promise. For years she had whispered prayers silently. Tonight she had roared them, through fire and iron, against silence itself. And the voice, alive, trembling, real, was proof that some vows couldn't be broken. Her gaze swept the squad. They were battered, weary, but alive. And now they bore witness to something greater than survival. Sometimes courage didn't roar in victory. Sometimes it roared in devotion. She pressed her lips together, eyes softening for the first time since the mission began. The figure reached out, their hand brushing hers. No words, just the quiet understanding of a promise fulfilled. The lieutenant exhaled, voice low, almost to himself. "Let's move out. Extraction is still on the clock." She nodded, lifting her rifle, but her gaze never left the figure. Because tonight, survival wasn't just about leaving the valley alive. It was about keeping promises, honoring the lost, and daring the impossible. And she had done all three. Why did the night feel alive with echoes? The extraction point loomed ahead, dim lights blinking in the darkness. Dust swirled with the wind, carrying with it the scent of earth, smoke, and spent gunpowder. Every soldier moved with measured steps, rifles raised, but the weight on their shoulders had shifted. They weren't just surviving anymore. They had carried a vow across valleys, through gunfire, and into memory. She moved at the rear, eyes scanning the perimeter, but her attention kept flicking back to the figure they had rescued, alive, whole, proof that some promises weren't broken by time, by silence, or by war. The corporal walked beside her, quieter now, still glancing at her every so often. She didn't acknowledge it. She didn't need to. He understood, even without words. The lieutenant was ahead, scanning with practiced precision. every step calculated, every motion deliberate. Even he seemed softer now, a faint easing of tension in his shoulders, as if witnessing her vow fulfilled allowed him a small reprieve. Martinez limped beside the figure they had saved, protective, alert, his hand steady despite the bandaged wound. She noticed the way he glanced at her once, almost shyly, and she offered the tiniest nod. No words needed. The wind whispered across the valley, carrying sounds that had been absent for hours. Distant crows, the soft rustle of leaves, the faint hum of the transport hovering in the distance. The squad reached the final stretch. Extraction ropes descended from the hovering aircraft, chains clanking against metal in the wind. The hum of the engines filled the air, drowning out all other noise, yet somehow highlighting it too, the quiet that had been waiting, the echoes of all they had endured, the weight of every heartbeat that had brought them here. She led the figure forward first, supporting them. Every movement deliberate, careful, each step a statement. We made it. The corporal followed, then Martinez, the rest of the squad forming a line. She brought up the rear. Her eyes swept the horizon one last time. The valley lay behind them, silent, broken, but alive with memory. The ropes wrapped around their wrists, harnesses secured. One by one they ascended. The hum of the engines grew louder. The wind tore at their uniforms, whipping hair into faces, cutting through the cold. And yet in her chest, a storm had calmed. The figure they had rescued reached for her hand instinctively. She didn't resist. A soft squeeze, just enough to acknowledge the journey they had shared, the promise that had endured. The lieutenant called up to her, voice strained but steady. Last group, move. She secured herself to the harness, feet dangling above the valley floor. The wind tugged, the rotors slicing through air, and for the first time tonight she let herself exhale. Her mind replayed the night. The ambush, the whispers, the fire, the shadows, the fear, the weight of the vow she had carried alone for years. Every step, every decision, every heartbeat had led to this. She glanced at the squad below her, the young corporal, Martinez, the others, alive, breathing, tested, and still standing. And then at the figure beside her, eyes glistening in the faint light of the aircraft, a soft, trembling smile. She pressed the dog tags against her chest, feeling their cold weight, feeling the years of loss, guilt, and defiance all converge into a single moment. The engines roared louder, the ropes lifted, the valley dropped away. She allowed herself to whisper now, not a roar, not a prayer, but a quiet acknowledgement to the wind. I kept my promise. The figure beside her let out a breath, shaky but relieved. Their hand lingered in hers, and for a moment nothing else existed. Not the mission, not the squad, not the night. Just survival, just fulfillment. Just the quiet strength of a vow carried through fire and iron. The helicopter rose above the valley, the shadows shrinking below them. The squad settled in the hold, catching their breaths, faces streaked with dust and sweat. The lieutenant exhaled heavily, finally allowing a trace of relief to soften his features. The young corporal slumped back against the wall, still trembling. She placed a hand on his shoulder, grounding him. He looked at her wide-eyed. You did it," he said softly. She smiled faintly, only for a heartbeat. We did it. Because no victory tonight was hers alone. It belonged to the squad, to the vow, to every quiet, desperate hope that had refused to die. The figure leaned back beside her, breathing steadying. She glanced at them, letting herself see the years they had endured, the fear, the abandonment, and now the fragile thread of redemption restored. The aircraft hummed steadily, carrying them away from the valley, away from the shadows that had haunted them. Below, the terrain receded, jagged and silent. Above, the stars blinked softly, indifferent to their struggle yet somehow honoring it. Her thoughts drifted inward, reflecting on the night, on fear faced, courage claimed, and promises fulfilled. She realized now that strength wasn't in the roar that others heard. It was in the quiet choices, the defiance in the darkness, the will to continue when everything inside urged surrender. She looked at the squad one last time. Faces lit by the dim cabin lights, eyes tired but alive. Even the youngest, still wide-eyed, seemed changed. They had seen what she had carried alone, and in their own way they understood. Her hand found the dog tags again. Cold, weighty, real. A small smile crept across her face. Not triumphant, not arrogant. Simply a recognition that sometimes survival was not enough. Sometimes you had to honor the promises that defined you, no matter the cost. The helicopter banked gently, the wind rushing past, carrying them toward safety. Her gaze drifted to the figure beside her. Words were unnecessary. The quiet understanding, the connection, the acknowledgement of shared endurance, that was enough. She closed her eyes, letting the hum of the aircraft, the warmth of the cabin, the collective relief of the squad, and the presence of the rescued soul wash over her. And in that moment she understood fully. Sometimes courage didn't speak. Sometimes dignity didn't speak. It simply acted. Years of fear, of silence, of whispers chasing her through every mission, through every shadowed valley had led to this. A quiet moment of fulfillment. A vow kept. A promise honored. She opened her eyes, looking out the open side of the aircraft at the receding valley. The darkness that had pursued them all night seemed less imposing now. Not gone, but understood, faced, and survived. The helicopter roared onward, carrying them above the mountains, above the memories, above the fire and iron that had tested them all. She rested her hand on the figure beside her once more, fingers brushing. Not a promise spoken this time. No need. It was understood. The squad exhaled collectively, relief and exhaustion mingling in the cabin. She watched them quietly, nodding the subtle shifts. The young corporal's tentative smile, Martinez's slow blink, the lieutenant's straightened posture. All of them marked by the night, changed, stronger. She pressed the dog tags once more against her chest, cold, real, and heavy with meaning. A final whisper escaped her lips, carried over the roar of the helicopter. We made it. We always make it. And with that, the valley fell behind them. The night air stretched infinitely. Stars blinked softly above. She allowed herself one more long breath. And then silence,